Thank you very much, Alex and Ian. Um, I'm here to introduce Professor Joy Singaraya. Joy is she's currently a professor of paleoclimatology and a joint head.
Um, but there's loads of benefits of having a diverse team. So we're more creative when we're working with different people. We'll solve problems faster because there's lots of people with thinking of it in a different way. There's loads of evidence that companies that have diverse teams work better and do better. So financially, they're more likely to be innovation leaders. When we've got diversity, the members will feel happier, they'll feel more included. So a particular example of a gender diverse team, they're more generous, feel more psychologically safe, and build more meaningful relationships. I can't see what this one says because I'm blocking it with the little picture of us all. Diversity adds new skills to the team, promotes personal professional growth, and outperforms. So there's loads of reasons. I think the biggest reason is just we should do it. It seems so obvious to me, and I think, like I say, all of you, of why diversity is important. But there's also all this evidence behind why we work better, and this all fits with research. We want to be innovation leaders, so we need to be working in these diverse teams to do that. So if we're saying, and we're all on board with the idea that we have a diverse team, we'll have better research culture. We then need to understand the pipeline into maths research. So how do we get there to be more diversity in the team? So particularly, I'm thinking of us as academics. How do we get that diversity from a child all the way to becoming an academic? So this is a typical pipeline, at least, I guess, in the UK. We go to school, we pick our A-level. So I guess that's the first real choice that we would hope, I guess, people are picking maths, maybe further maths. You're then picking your degree, which again, to become, if we're thinking of, say, the maths research, often that degree would be in maths, not always. From degree, you do your PhD, you then do your postdoc, and you then hopefully get an academic position. So again, there's lots of choices there. From PhD, do you leave and go to industry? From your postdoc, do you leave? And at any one point, of course, you could drop out. So you could drop out from degree, your PhD. So there's all these ways we can leave. So really, to get the diverse teams, we need to make sure that diverse people can move along this pipeline. I'm like I've put my disclaimer, this is just what I see as the typical route, but by no means the only route. So loads of people have really fantastic, diverse routes into getting to academia. So people leave, they come back at later stages, they leave completely, and then come back at all these different points. It is possible. So whilst this is a typical one that I often think about, it doesn't mean that there's not different routes available. But I think it's really important thinking why people leave at each stage, and particularly why we're not getting the same proportions leave. So people obviously are going to leave. We're not expecting the whole world to become maths academics, but we want them to be leaving in the same proportion. So if, for example, more women are leaving than men, or more Black people are leaving than white, things like this that are issues, and we're not going to get that diversity later in the pipeline. So there's loads we can look at in the different stages. So this is from the pipeline report, which is focusing on maths excellence, but looking at the different stages in school and how people move from the different levels to GCSE. So there's a lot happening on this diagram, but you can kind of see if they're doing better earlier, they're more likely to carry on to do better at GCSE. But also you do see that people that have lower levels can still get to that grade 9 GCSE. So there's things happening that just because you're a bit behind at one point, it doesn't mean that you can't go on to do really well, which I think is really important, because I think maths sometimes has this idea that it's like this innate ability and everyone's a genius, and if you struggle, you couldn't possibly carry on, whereas actually you definitely can, and we need to encourage that and really say that actually you may not think you're good at maths at all for ages, and then suddenly something will click and you'll get it. So it's interesting to see, but also important to see that early on does have an effect. So we really do need to be targeting from literally children coming to school to think what their perceptions of maths are. So a lot of my talk, I'm trying to focus on diversity as a whole, but I often will use examples on gender because it's the thing I've done the most work on with Athena Swans, and obviously being a woman myself, it's something I have a lot of experience on. So yeah, my examples often will be sort of gender, but that doesn't mean they don't fit for a lot of other aspects. So this one's looking at A-level further maths participation based on GCSE. And so you can see that boys are much more likely to do an A-level in further maths if they did well at GCSE than girls are, which isn't surprising because we know that there's not the same proportions doing further maths. So again, that's a leak in our pipeline starting straight away, because further maths often is seen as an entry in, and some degrees actually you need further maths. So we're already seeing people leaking out that way that we would need to explore. The jump to degree then, we've now got looking again at gender. If they got an A star in A-level maths, what do they go on to do their degree in? So the most common for everyone is maths, but you can see it's not the same proportions for male, female. So we've got a lot more females going in to do medicine than maths, which isn't a bad thing. Medicine is great too, but we're not having those similar proportions. So there is a question of why. So I think, again, it's really important to say that when people aren't doing maths, that doesn't mean they're failing in any way. They're going on to do other incredible things, which is great. We just don't want people that do want to do maths to not feel like they can. So that's the problem. It's when they maybe would have, but there's something stopping them, that barrier. The fact that they've got choice to do something else can only be a good thing, and we all should have that. So then you've got all the way to academia, and you can think of kind of the life cycle of an academic job. So you join, your recruitment, up to leaving, and all these other things that are happening along the way. So promotion, progression, reward, and thinking of things like this equitable for diverse people. Are we getting promoted at the same rates? Are we getting rewarded at the same rates? Is our workload the same? All these things that could then lead to more people leaving academia because perhaps they're not having the same experiences. So I think it's really important to think of this whole pipeline, and you could talk for hours about every single stage. There's so much happening. But the real thing to think about is who's left, or conversely, who's missing. So this shows at different stages the gender split again. In fact, actually, it's sex data. So this is a real, I've got a bee in my bonnet, I think, justifiably, that we always collect sex data. So I'm having to use that because that's the only data I've got, but I don't think it's good enough. We really want to be collecting gender data because we're missing experiences from non-binary and trans people. We're not letting people self-describe who they are, which would reflect their experiences. So that's a massive disclaimer that I think is a weakness. But for now, it gives us a sense still that we can see gender is getting, the representation is getting worse at senior levels, which I think people know anecdotally, and there's loads of data. Just if you look in your own department, I'd be surprised if you didn't see the same. So people are dropping off throughout the pipeline. So yeah, that's for sex. So who else is missing? So yeah, we've got females. Like I said, it's only sex data, so we really have no idea what's happening with non-binary and trans people. I would assume they're not feeling included. I mean, just the fact that we can't say anything, I don't think is going to help them feel included. So that's a real issue of who's missing. Certain ethnicities are underrepresented. So Black professors make up less than 1% of science academics. Low disability disclosure rates. So again, it's hard to say anything, but even if we are sort of proportionally having people with disabilities, which I feel we might not be, they don't feel comfortable actually to disclose, which is a problem. There's lots of data missing on LGBTQIA plus identities. So again, it's really hard to say anything, but there feels like there's probably a problem there, that we're not, at least not being inclusive. And then other things to think about, like those with caring responsibilities, those from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds. And then what about intersectionality? So if we then start combining different characteristics, are we proportionally capturing those as well? So there's loads to think about, and I always think it's really powerful when you're in a room with people, particularly if you're in kind of senior meetings, thinking who's missing. Like if there was somebody else, like the empty chair, who's not in this room, and really thinking about what that is, because the data shows us a lot, but we're missing a lot from the data, but we can see it because we're in these places. So yeah, really thinking about who is missing, and then we can start to think, okay, why are they missing? So I've got this link to a Padlet. I'm not going to go and get your answers, but you can, I'll keep it up for a second so you can add, and then I will look after, because I'm really interested why people think people do lead the research pipeline. Because again, I think we'll all have different ideas and different experiences. And particularly those of us that are diverse may have ideas of what would have made us lead. So I've got a few things that I can think of in these different headings. Again, not an exhaustive list. And as somebody that constantly has had to make choices whether I'm going to stay, a lot of these are things that along the way I've thought of, I think I'm going to leave because of X, Y, Z. So I'm lucky that I have stayed and I've got to where I am and much more settled and happy, but it definitely hasn't been like that the whole journey. So I think there's definitely a perception that people think they can't stay. I definitely had this when I was an undergrad. I looked at my lecturers. I was taught by one woman, and I just thought there must be a reason that there's no women here, that like there's got to be a reason. So why do I think I could do it if nobody else can? Which goes with the not feeling good enough, and just feeling like you can't do it. There's also this, you don't want to stay, which again, it's always fine, and we should honour people's choices. It's more if they don't want to stay based on bad experiences or inequitable reasons. So for example, that last reason of they just want to do something else, that's a valid reason. It's one of the few reasons here that I think is actually valid. But not feeling like you fit in, not having the support, mentorship that perhaps other people, particularly those in sort of majorities, are getting, negative experiences. So I think there is data saying, if you're more diverse, you're probably more likely to experience bullying and harassment. Problems with the career that might affect people differently. So location changes, job security, poor work-life balance are probably going to affect somebody with caring responsibilities more than someone without. So again, they're not affecting us in the same way. And then perhaps it feels like the most obvious worst way, although it may be that the others are more invisible, but just prevented from staying. So actively being excluded. So there could be active discrimination. You're not getting jobs because someone literally is saying, I don't want to hire you because you're a woman. But also more invisibly, unconscious bias, not being given opportunities to progress. You're not getting the senior roles that mean that you're going to progress, or there's a lot in academia of, I think people will have stories of the kind of, it's who you know, that you get a position based on somebody knowing you and liking you, that then helps you, and from there you get going. But if perhaps you're a bit different, people are less likely to give you those opportunities, so you're less likely to progress. So like I say, these are just some of the reasons I can think of. So you might think but we know that there's loads of really talented, diverse academics. So is that not evidence that it's okay? And also it's worth saying, because I think sometimes you talk about this and it takes away from all those amazing, diverse academics, but actually they're there. There's loads of incredible people there. But actually the fact that we have loads of really talented ones can still actually be evidence for discrimination. So I've come across this Jackie Robinson effect, subject. So it's in baseball. I think Jackie Robinson was. I'm not a sports person, but basically the management were probably more comfortable with with white players than black players. So for a black player to make the team, they had to be a lot better than a white player, because if they were sort of on par, the white player would get chosen. So actually, it meant that on a team, the black players probably were the best players actually on the team, just because they had to be to get chosen. And you see this in all sorts of places. So yeah, that's that example. We've got in Congress, female members are more likely to get bills passed than males. Patients seen by female doctors are less likely to die and less likely to be readmitted. And papers authored by females in economics are cited more than papers by males. So this isn't me now going, well, women are better. It's definitely not saying that. It's just saying that perhaps because it's harder to get into some of these subjects as a woman because of the lack of diversity, that they have to work harder to actually get into that space. And then, so when they do, they actually will succeed because they were really good. But then there's some that aren't getting into the space because even though they're the same as their male counterpart, the male's being picked over them. So I think that's really interesting because, yeah, I think sometimes people say, well, I know a really incredible woman, so therefore it's not a problem. And actually that's not the case still. And you can see this little figure. So if we've got the actual skill and the perceived skill, if for the red squares, the perceived skill is lower. So these may be for our more diverse groups, so women, people from different ethnicities, that you hire based on perceived skill, not actual skill. So you would hire less of the red squares than the black circles because of that difference in perceived skill. But it means that the actual skill will actually be higher for the red normally. So what can we do? Because I've talked about lots of ways people leave and sort of doom and gloom, but there's loads we can do and are doing. So carrying on understanding the pipeline. And whilst I have asked you what's interesting, we can't just look at the people that are already in it. So we've got things like survival bias. So this example from World War II of them collecting data from planes that came back to the UK. They looked at where the damage was basically, and they thought, right, we need to add more armour to all the places with the damage. Seemed sensible. But of course, these were the planes that came back, so the ones that survived. So actually, the ones that weren't coming back were the ones that were being hit in the places that there was no data on, because they would go straight down. So actually, they needed to add more armour to the places where there was no data, because that's what would make a plane go down. Again, you can tell I'm not an engineer at all. So it's the exact opposite. So again, if we talk to people, diverse people in academia, they are the ones that are still here. So whilst they will have things to offer and can think, why might they have left? Their experiences aren't going to be the same as the people that have left. So we need to address not just talking to those already still here, and that we need to think about those that have left at any point along that pipeline. Also, systematic discrimination is a stochastic process. So just like it's impossible to say which highway accidents happen because of bad weather, we just know that there's more accidents. So often you can't say this happened because it was raining, but we do know that when it's raining, there are more accidents. That's very similar. So any one instance of something happening negative to me, for example, I don't know if that's happening from discrimination or just because that person maybe isn't very pleasant. But it's probably happening to me more than my male counterpart. Same with race. Probably things that are happening to me are happening less to a black counterpart of me. So it's really hard to say any one thing and say you're doing this because you're discriminating. But if it's happening to me 10 times and it's happening to a man once, 9 of those times probably were discrimination. But I don't know which one wasn't. So it's really hard to pinpoint exactly when it's happening, just that it probably is. So we can explore the pipeline going all the way back to childhood. So this is a really exciting project I'm part of, the Observatory for Mathematical Education. where we're doing a massive longitudinal study for 7 years, so from primary and secondary, and we'll also be looking at university. We'll be surveying a large cohort of children every year to see kind of how they feel about maths and when they have to start making choices, so GCSE to A level to degree, to see what's influencing those choices. So we can see right from primary. So our first data collection will be primary school children, which will be really interesting to see already what their perceptions of maths is and how that will vary for different characteristics. We should also just celebrate the diversity that there is. So even though we know that we're lacking it, we still have it, and we've had it forever in maths. We just aren't necessarily as good at recognising it. So these are just a few examples that I know, and I show this to our first year students every year to say that there are mathematicians from all sorts of different backgrounds out there that we should be celebrating and not just seeing it as kind of the stereotypical mathematician. Also just calling out bad behaviour. So this was from an active bystander training that I went to, and it gave 4 ways of calling it out. So direct action, distraction, delegation and delay, all valid in different situations. But I think that's really powerful if we want people to feel included. When we notice something happening that isn't good, we need to address it. It's so easy, and I 100% used to do this, and still there'll be situations where you're too shocked to do anything, but it's really easy to do nothing, and then you've kind of signaled to the person that's experienced it that was okay, and to the person doing it that's okay. So addressing it at the source quickly, and often it doesn't need to be a big deal, can just make everyone feel more included, which of course will make people want to stay. Also recognition schemes. So I can't do a talk like this without talking about Athena Swan, because feels like it was my life for the past couple of years. I led our maths silver submission and was also the deputy lead for Nottingham's gold Athena Swan, which is really exciting. And it's made me really see the value in these schemes, because I think before I got really involved, I kind of saw it as a bit of a tick box exercise. And I think it sometimes can still be seen as that, but when it's done right, it can be really powerful. So you need to look at what the data is telling you. So don't go in thinking you know what we need to do and go away thinking, yeah, we'll do what I think. You need to be very flexible to see, like, actually what is happening, what can we do? So things like staff proportions, student proportions, and comparing to benchmarks. We also looked at things like, the rate of success from application to interview to job offer. And we were seeing that varied for different types of people. So it pinpointed where in our process things were fine and where in our process things weren't so good. Also surveys, so you can really get staff opinions, because the data can't tell us everything. So again, whilst it's really useful to look at the data, and I think we should, also acknowledging the gaps in the data, and where we can pick that up from surveys, and also just anecdotal evidence, people telling us things. I think particularly as a statistician, I want everything to be backed up by data. And actually sometimes someone saying I've experienced this is more powerful than the data, which probably just can't pick it up. Pick priorities. So you sometimes want to try and fix everything. You can't, not all at once anyway. So pick what are your priorities and really try and do those well. With Athena Swan, it's every 5 years. So it's long term to get really stuck into a priority, but it's not long enough to fix the whole of your department. So trying to fix bits of it, and then in the next 5 years, you can pick new priorities. So yeah, I think it's better to do less really well. Create a realistic action plan. So again, we sort of came stuck to this, that when I took over, the action plan was very ambitious, but we hadn't really put into place any of the ways to do it. So a lot of things were missed just because it probably wasn't feasible. So I think we've got a lot better at being like, what actually can we do? And let's go with that. Give yourself time to do that, consult others, assign actions among all staff, and get buy-in from those responsible. So yeah, don't just do it really quickly and then submit it. Talk to all the people that will be involved. Make sure they're happy. You don't want to be telling someone who's an expert, if someone's had a certain role in your department for years and years, if you just come along and say, now you need to do this, they're not going to be bought in. Whereas if you consult with them and make sure they're happy, they're going to buy into it, and then they're actually going to deliver that action. And make sure that the actions are sustainable. So these are a few examples from ours. Again, for the sake of time, I won't go through them all. But yeah, thinking how things will be sustainable was really important for me, because I don't want it to be that if something happens to me, it all just falls through. So we've written it into role profiles, and some things are just mandatory. So for example, you need to have EDI training to be on an interview panel, but that's not something I need to enforce. You literally cannot be on a panel if you don't have it. So I have nothing to do with that happening, but I know full well it will happen. So things like that you can really get just ingrained, so they just carry on. Another way to improve the pipeline, of course, is just sharing best practice. So like today is the perfect example, hearing what other people do, and listening. So there's things we do. Something I started was departmental EDI forums. We pick an issue. So we've had like gender equality, race equality. The other day we were talking about group projects and how to make those more equitable. It's really nice, and I think people like it because it gives them a chance to talk and share their experiences. And it's been really good because we've had diverse people come. So not just the diverse people, almost the people that these issues don't really affect. They're coming because they know it's their responsibility to make better. I've recently started faculty EDI community of practices. So this was basically realizing there's pockets in our uni of EDI people, and we're all a bit lonely sometimes. So getting us together to kind of support each other, but then share our good practice. Again, for the sake of time, I won't go through all of them, but hopefully you've had a chance to read them from the screen. And this is an example of the email for the forum. So making it really clear that people can come, engage in whatever the way they want. A lot of people just sit muted, which is fine because they're still listening. But really, yeah, emphasizing that they don't have to be part of the problem to be part of the solution. Reporting systems are really important. Again, I won't spend long talking about this, but I think whenever you talk about like improving diversity, you need to have a system that reports can happen when something goes wrong, because things will go wrong. So you need to have that really transparent, and people know what they can do if something happens. So we have an anonymous reporting system. It's clear where it goes, what will happen, when it will stay confidential, when it wouldn't stay confidential, all things like this, and lots of options of who it goes to. So if the person you want to report is part of that mechanism, making sure it wouldn't go to them, so you're not just complaining about the person that's going to get your complaint. So it's really important, and hopefully it doesn't need to be used lots, but it needs to be there for people to feel safe. And then finally, just thinking constantly how you can help as an individual. So a lot of what we've talked about is kind of structures and big things, but I think if everybody listened to kind of thinking what they can do as an individual, that's really how we're going to change things. So just constantly challenging yourself, accepting from your mistakes, learn from them, move on, standing up to people, calling out bad behavior, and just a lot of learning constantly. It's really uncomfortable sometimes, isn't it, where you realize you've done something for years and you're like, oh, why did I do that? I shouldn't, have used this terminology, or I had this bias that I didn't realize, things like that. And it's really uncomfortable because you're kind of accepting you've done something wrong, but that's so much better than just thinking you're perfect and then not changing anything. So being comfortable, being uncomfortable, really, I think is one of the most powerful things we can all do. So yeah, thank you all. And if there's any questions, I think hopefully there's some time.
Yep, thanks a lot, Katie. Yeah, we would have time for a question if anybody has any. Yep, you can raise your hand. I see there is I think it's more of a comment in the chat box.
I've stunned everyone into silence. And whether that's good or bad, who knows?
Okay, well, seeing the time ticking on, we might leave it there. But thanks a lot, Katie. Lots of really good points, lots of questions I'll have, but I'll save them for another time.
Brilliant, thank you.